Over the past few years, we have repeatedly seen that the global world order has changed. As we were discussing the Russo-Ukrainian War, we kept asking ourselves, is that really so? And although, looking back, one can notice that the causes of global conflicts have remained almost the same as they were 500 years ago, the way they look continues to evolve with the times. Every major war eventually ends, and people swear in horror that they will never let it happen again. But, very quickly, everything is forgotten, and with blind confidence the mistakes are repeated. And so a new generation, yet again, finds itself knee-deep in mud and blood, while the only thing that truly changes is the scale of the tragedies. It is also the last thing a busy citizen wants to think about after coming home from work. This is perfectly logical, but unfortunately, very dangerous. However, let us not delve too deeply into philosophy. Today, we present a new major video series. Its goal will be to shed light on the modern military capabilities of countries in the Northern Atlantic Alliance, as well as their realities, equipment, doctrines, and objectives, in an era where the old rules of the game are no longer applicable. We spent a long time choosing an army that would serve as a strong starting point for this series. After careful consideration, we decided to begin with Finland, a country that formally became a NATO member only in the spring of 2023, yet had never truly been novice in matters of national defense. The core assumption on which Finnish defense had rested for decades was that, in a critical moment, the first days and weeks will have to be endured primarily by relying on one's own system. If aggression does occur, this will be critically important, as NATO has never yet faced a precedent that would test its full response to, first and foremost, the Russian threat. Let us begin with the main factor that ultimately determined the choice of the first guest in our series. Finland shares a 1,340-kilometer border with Russia, and after joining NATO, this became the longest land border between the alliance and its potential adversary. Precisely because of its placement, Finland historically conceived its armed forces not as an expeditionary tool, but as a basis of state survival, where the priority is not conducting a few brilliant operations, but the ability to sustain prolonged defensive and attritional conflict on its own land. With that in mind, we should start with the people. Finland's population is roughly 5,626,000 as of 2025, but this alone could be misleading with regards to the country's defense capabilities. The core of the armed forces primarily exists to enable the rapid expansion of trained reserves in a crisis. Therefore, the Finnish Defense Forces speak of a reserve of approximately 900,000 and a standing force of just 24,000 personnel at peacetime. The reserve exists to become the source of reinforcement, rotation, the restoration of combat capability, and expansion for them once combat begins. From the outset, the system has been designed for long-term territorial defense. Rare among European countries, mandatory conscription fits perfectly with this thinking. The Finnish Defense Forces set service lengths at 165, 255, or 347 days depending on training and role. Most undergo basic training relatively quickly, while more complex specialties such as officers require a longer cycle. However, modern warfare tests not how elegantly a country's mobilization math looks, but whether it can withstand harsh realities and additional challenges such as missile and drone strikes of varying ranges, supply shortages, and maintenance bottlenecks. Therefore, the correct question here is not whether a state can simply increase numbers, but whether it can sustain combat effectiveness through decentralization. And here, Finland possesses one strong but often underestimated advantage, as it views defense not only as the army's responsibility. Finland's concept of comprehensive security is essentially a description of how society and the state will maintain vital functions under any conditions, working together: government, business, other organizations, and citizens. A concrete example of this logic can be seen in how civilian logistics and infrastructure are pre-integrated into defense planning. Ports, rail networks, fuel distribution systems, and telecommunications operators are all incorporated into contingency planning, allowing authorities to rapidly redirect capacity towards defense needs without requiring emergency legislation or ad hoc coordination. Similarly, exercises routinely involve ministries and private operators alongside the military. testing not battlefield tactics, but the continuity of supply, transportation, and governance under stress. The government's Comprehensive Defense Report states that the defense system will employ the Border Guard's authorities, surveillance capabilities, and high readiness to protect territorial integrity, and that Border Guard units may, if necessary, be integrated into the Finnish Defense Forces. In practical terms, this means that assets such as Border Guard patrol units, coastal vessels, helicopters, and surveillance networks are already planned for wartime use. Having examined the overarching idea behind manpower, one can already discern the characteristic Finnish approach to sustaining defense capability. However, to understand why modern Finnish defense looks the way it does, we also need to step back into the history that shaped its motto. Freedom of foreign and domestic policy emerges only when a country possesses sufficient internal resilience not to become hostage to the very first act of coercion. Finland declared independence on December 6, 1917. And the very fact of being born next to a great empire immediately embedded a permanent idea. Security here would never be a purely theoretical issue. That reality was tested in the Winter War, when the Soviet Union attacked on November 30th, 1939. After brutal fighting and the Treaty of Moscow in March 1940, Finland lost territory but preserved statehood, cementing a core lesson that still shapes its defense. Outside help may be late or uncertain, so a small country must be able to fight effectively on its own. Finland's role in World War II is more complex. Without a formal alliance, it cooperated closely with Germany. It allowed German troops transit, and by June 22, 1941, German units were already on Finnish territory. Finland then moved to recapture areas lost in 1940 and later advanced into eastern Karelia, which had never been part of Finland. As the war dragged on, exhaustion and a Soviet breakthrough on the Karelian Isthmus forced a strategic reset, ending in the Moscow Armistice on September 19, 1944, which again imposed territorial concessions. After the war, Finland's survival strategy became institutional. The 1948 Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance formalized neutrality in exchange for preserving independence and room for domestic policy. But Finnish neutrality never meant disarmament. It required credible territorial defense to prevent coercion. After the Soviet collapse, Finland steadily integrated with the West, joining NATO's Partnership for Peace in 1994. And the European Union on January 1, 1995, while keeping the same underlying logic: security first, everything else second. Maintaining this balance for nearly a quarter of a century, Finland ultimately decided, after the start of Russia's aggression against Ukraine in 2022, to firmly establish itself as a member of NATO. Given its deep prior integration with Western military structures and near compliance with alliance requirements, the ascension process was exceptionally fast. On April 4, 2023, Finland's NATO Ascension Treaty was ratified during a ceremony in Brussels. Formally, this closed the historical era of proclaimed neutrality and shifted Finnish defense strategy into a framework of collective guarantees, joint planning, and integrated deterrence. Yet NATO membership alone is not a panacea. While it enhances deterrence and, in theory, enables access to Allied reinforcement mechanisms, it does not remove the requirement for a robust national defense system capable of sustaining the first phase of high-intensity conflict, primarily on its own. On September 1, 2024, the Bilateral Defense Cooperation Agreement between Finland and the United States entered into force, creating a legal and practical framework for deeper military cooperation, including access arrangements and conditions for U.S. presence on Finnish territory, closely tied to NATO obligations and subject to Finnish consent. At the same time, this framework is not immune to political risk. Shifts in U.S. strategic focus and domestic debate regarding Europe inevitably affect the perceived weight and reliability of such bilateral agreements, reinforcing Finland's long-standing reluctance to base its security on any single external actor. In parallel, Finland began hosting new elements of NATO's operational command structure. On September 1, 2025, a new NATO headquarters, the Multi-Corps Land Component Command Northwest, began operating in Mikkeli. This development is significant not only symbolically but structurally. Territorial defense is no longer a purely national issue, even at the level of staff architecture. A permanent planning and coordination hub for NATO land forces on the northern flank now exists on Finnish territory, directly integrating Finnish defense planning into the broader Northern European operational framework. Alongside this, NATO messaging and partner nation statements increasingly refer to the establishment of Forward Land Forces Finland, with activity focused in the Rovaniemi and Sodankylä regions, underscoring Finland's role as a frontline state in alliance deterrence and defense posture in the high north. Yet any military architecture ultimately depends on its resource base, and here we observe another significant shift that clearly signals Finland's assessment of the evolving threat environment. On April 1, 2025, the Finnish Ministry of Defense announced a course toward raising defense spending from roughly 2.5% to at least 3% of GDP by 2029, explicitly framing the decision as a response to long-term changes in the security environment and the need to sustain logistics, infrastructure resilience, and force modernization over time. In absolute terms, defense spending remains relatively modest, approximately $7.6 billion as of 2026, but the political and strategic intent is unambiguous. Finland is actively rearming itself for a strong, enduring defense posture in the event of a major conflict. Further steps, such as Finland's withdrawal from the 1997 Ottawa Convention banning anti-personnel landmines, which took effect on January 10, 2026, only reinforce this direction by restoring tools traditionally central to territorial defense. Before moving on to the next section, let us recall that as of 2025, under normal conditions, Finland has about 13,000 regular professional personnel, while training roughly 20,000 conscripts per year. But the structure is built for mobilization. Finland's official wartime strength is 280,000, of which about 95% are reservists, with the wartime distribution shown as 185 Army, 24,000 Navy, 29,000 Air Force, and 12,000 Border Guard troops. Behind that sits a much larger pool, about 900,000 trained reservists, meaning citizens who have completed military service. To keep that portion current, Finland runs regular refresher and voluntary training, around 28,000 participants in compulsory refresher training annually, plus roughly 8,000 in voluntary training. In addition, the country aims to increase the trained reserve to 1 million by 2031. Officially, the core of the ground component consists of 8 formations: Jäger Brigade, Guard Jäger Regiment, Kainu Brigade, Karelia Brigade, Army Academy, Armored Brigade, Pori Brigade, and Uti Jäger Regiment. The command authority for all ground forces is the Army Command in Mikkeli. With regard to mandatory conscription, recruits are not confined to reserve or training formations, but are assigned directly to operational brigade-level units across the Army, with the exception of the elite Uti Jäger Regiment. This recruitment approach shows one thing: Finland does not want to rely on only a big mobilization on day X in an emergency, but tries to always keep its citizens in the loop of defense responsibilities and planning. This is also demonstrated by the participation of readiness units, local units, reservists, and allies in the Cold Response 26 exercise in Rovajärvi, where roughly 3,500 Finnish troops and 4,000 troops from allied countries will take part. 2 points are also worth noting. First, the focus for readiness units is meant to be precisely on rapid planning and movement into the areas of operations. Secondly, checking logistics is also a prerequisite for any combat operation. In effect, these actions are aimed at verifying the rapid response capabilities of reserves and how well they can coordinate with a small corps of regular troops. Next, we will try to break down the functions and tasks of each existing unit in more detail. Karelia Brigade is the Army's largest formation. It integrates 4,000 conscripts per year who are trained along with roughly 600 permanent personnel. Pori Brigade, besides national defense, also carries the burden of preparing for demanding international tasks as part of the Finnish Rapid Deployment Force. Kainu Brigade is directly tied to geography. It maintains readiness in its zone and is responsible for almost a third of Finland's territory, guarding a vast area quite far from the capital. Its existence once again shows that Finland puts a lot of emphasis on where units are placed. Guard Jäger Regiment further reinforces this pattern. Deployed in the capital and overall most urbanized region, they specialize precisely in urban combat. In peacetime, the brigade trains 1,600 conscripts per year, while having approximately 400 permanent personnel. Jäger Brigade, by contrast, concentrates on the northern direction, including the Arctic region. Its focus is operations in the harsh conditions of Lapland and support to other adjacent units. This unit, stranded in a desolate area, might seem like a controversial idea at first. Lapland's vast distances, limited road network, forests, wetlands, and severe weather make any direct assault extremely risky. At the same time, attempting to bypass the brigade does not remove the threat it poses. An advancing force that moves past it risks leaving a capable mobile unit in its rear, one well adapted to the terrain and able to disrupt supply lines, communications, and rear area security. Armored Brigade is the heavy hand of Finland's ground forces. In conscript materials, it is stated explicitly that soldiers are trained to operate as decentralized mechanized and motorized battle groups, crewing Leopard 2s, BMP 2s, and MTLBVs. UT Jäger Regiment covers two critical niches at once. It is the home of the Special Forces and the center of helicopter operations, where all 20 NH-90 and 7 MD-500 are concentrated. This fleet choice is very telling for a country that clearly does not have surplus aviation, but still seeks to provide SOF groups with maximum mobility for their special tasks. The unit has an emphasis on professionals. Public data lists approximately 460 regular troops and about 220 conscripts. In 2025, Finland also hosted and led the Southern Griffin 25 International SOF exercise, which explicitly included capability assessment with NATO participation. This signals integration into alliance standards through testing and compliance, not just on paper. Having outlined the units, we move directly to the arguably most interesting part, the modern means of destroying enemy forces, and we will begin with an overview of armored vehicles. In 2014, the Finnish Ministry of Defense signed an agreement to purchase 100 used Leopard 2A6 tanks from the Netherlands, with deliveries completed by 2019. Training on the 2A6 began with the Armored Brigade, and the tanks have also been employed by the Karelia Brigade. In Finnish doctrine, these vehicles are not treated as a breakthrough heavy fist, but rather as protected direct-fire assets supporting maneuver units. This assumption has proven increasingly valid in the era of pervasive UAV surveillance, where even Western main battle tanks are often employed as long-range, precision-fire platforms, rather than spearheads for deep advances. Alongside the Leopard 2A6 fleet, the land forces retain a significant inventory of older armored vehicles. 100 Leopard 2A4 tanks, 110 BMP-2MD infantry fighting vehicles, and 102 CV-9030 Finn IAFVs. These platforms are complemented by a large fleet of armored personnel carriers. In the tracked category, this includes approximately 320 MTLBU and MTLBV vehicles. In the wheeled segment, Finland operates 765 domestic APCs, notably 464 XA-180/185 vehicles, 101 XA-202 command post variants, 48 XA-203 OWS vehicles, 90 XA-300s, and 62 AMV-based XA-360s, as well as 44 Sisu GTP armored utility vehicles in various configurations. The structure reveals a clear and consistent trend. In the APC category, Finland relies predominantly on domestically produced platforms. This approach not only reduces dependence on foreign supply chains, but also allows engines, transmissions, and vehicle subsystems to be adapted specifically for operation in harsh climate conditions. The MTLB family, modified Soviet-era tracked APCs that have been carefully preserved, has long offered excellent all-terrain mobility, which made them valuable in Finland's terrain. However, these vehicles represent a legacy solution. Finland is expected to replace them with domestically produced tracked platforms like Patria Track X, which is scheduled to enter serial production in 2027. The remaining Soviet-origin systems, including BMP-2MD IFVs and the oldest XA-180/185 wheeled APCs, are also scheduled for replacement. BMP-2s are expected to be phased out in favor of additional CV-90 Mark IV vehicles, while older wheeled APCs will be replaced by new generation domestic platforms, primarily the Patria 6x6 family. In the summer of 2023, the agreement with Patria was signed for 91 XA-300 armored personnel carriers with an equipment package. The contract immediately included an option for 70 more vehicles. Such purchases improve mass mobility and unit logistics, but they do not turn every platoon into Western standard mechanized infantry, with protection and sensor levels that truly allow operation under hostile UAV observation. New wheeled platforms apparently still can be vulnerable to landmines, artillery, and FPV drones. At the same time, a few words should also be added about the heavier segment. In April 2024, Patria reported that the Minister of Defense had authorized the serial acquisition of a heavy 6x6 variant. The first phase mentions a pre-series vehicle and 20 Kongsberg remote weapon stations that will be integrated into the old platforms. A positive shift towards bringing the mass fleet closer to standards of greater survivability for modern combat. Having examined the main instruments of mechanized forces, now is the best time to mention the anti-tank component. Here, Finland appears pragmatic, attempting to purchase weapons of various ranges rather than a single solution. On December 9, 2022, the Finnish army announced the purchase of Spike SR and Spike LR2 anti-tank guided missiles. We know that the SR covers the short range, while the LR2 covers the longer range, and this directly corresponds to the reality where armored vehicles are increasingly operating either from behind cover or in quick raids, rather than engaging in prolonged contact as in the pre-drone era. In addition, in February 2023, Saab announced that it had received an order for NLAWs from Finland with deliveries scheduled for 2024. Artillery remains the most quantitatively dominant element of Finland's land forces. The inventory includes more than 1,500 systems, over 700 mortars, including 120mm 18XA361 AMO self-propelled ones, 474 towed 122mm H-63 howitzers, 74 122mm PSH-74 self-propelled guns, 169 155mm guns, the K-83 and K-98, and 33 K-9 155mm self-propelled howitzers. Finland ordered 96 of those from South Korea. The structure is clear. Mass-produced, relatively simple battalion and brigade-level systems dominate, while self-propelled artillery remains a smaller but increasingly modernized segment. This configuration constrains offensive tempo, but is well suited to defensive sustained fire operations. Parallel efforts include the testing of the domestic Patria ARV mobile artillery system, which mounts the 155 K98 gun on a Sisu chassis, indicating continued interest in mobile but logistically simpler artillery solutions. Learning lessons of the Russo-Ukrainian War, Finland also started actively acquiring electronic warfare equipment against small UAVs, drone detectors, and sites for engaging those kinds of threats. Army leadership also expressed interest in buying FPV drones for training and plans to train up to 500 UAV operators per year. Against the scale demonstrated in the Russo-Ukrainian War, that number may look modest. Still, it is an honest admission that without UAVs and counter-UAV measures, any impressive equipment totals will remain formidable only on paper, and a step that many of Finland's allies still have not made. Let's also consider rocket artillery. There are essentially two different kinds. 41 M270 heavy-tracked launchers for long-range high-precision strikes, and 34 lighter RM70 multiple-launch rocket systems for low-precision saturation and support at tactical depth. Finland's logic has not only been to maintain its guided GMLRS ammunition stockpiles for M270s, but also to reach further with extended-range GMLRS. The stockpiles for RM70s are also resupplied, as evidenced by purchases of 122mm rockets from Israel at least in 2022. Now to the drawbacks. 41 M270s are a lot for a small army, but not enough to comfortably reach many targets across the border and sustain losses. Second, in recent years, the focus has been on the GMLRS and ER-GMLRS family, but there are no purchase agreements for longer-range operational tactical missiles, such as ATACMS or PRSM. Therefore, the depth of high-precision strikes remains limited. Finally, given the geopolitical factors, it is uncertain whether all of the above-mentioned purchases in the US will actually be made on time and in full. The next element worth examining is land-based air defense, where Finland fields a layered but uneven structure. At the medium range, the Finnish Defense Forces operate 8 NASAMS-2 systems that include 24 individual launchers. These are primarily tasked with the protection of the capital region and other critical national assets, employing AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles. In doctrinal terms, NASAMS provides area defense against aircraft, helicopter, cruise missiles, and some UAV classes. The unavoidable question, however, is whether this relatively small number of medium-range launchers is sufficient to provide meaningful coverage beyond the capital and across a vast territory. At short range, Finland fields 20 Crowtail NG systems, which fill a niche of mobile SAM systems against low-flying targets. Its value lies less in range and more in reaction speed and accuracy within a confined defensive bubble. But once again, a small quantity and missile availability are key issues. Point defense and very short-range air defense is provided by at least 16 ASRAD systems mounted on vehicles, supplemented by man-portable systems including Stingers and RBS-70s. While exact launcher counts for manpads are not publicly disclosed, the RBS-70 remains a central pillar of Finland's close-range air defense. Gun-based air defense still plays a substantial role in Finland. The inventory includes over 407 various anti-aircraft guns, with really useful ones being only 7 self-propelled Leopard 2 marksman systems with twin 35mm cannon and radars. Those are relevant against various drones and are almost certainly cost-effective, but a low quantity of systems again makes their contribution to overall air defense negligible. Even the best manpads and SHORAD systems will struggle against saturation attacks and drone swarms, comprised of extremely cheap platforms. Without electronic warfare, low-altitude radar coverage, distributed sensors, and low-cost kinetic or electronic countermeasures, the balance of interceptor cost versus target cost inevitably will work against Finland. Finally, if we turn to long-range ballistic missile defense, Finland announced in 2023 its decision to procure the David Sling system. This choice remains controversial. Systems such as Patriot PAC-3 and SAMP-T-NG have already demonstrated their ability to intercept complex and high-end threats, including Iskander ballistic missiles, under real combat conditions, capabilities that Israeli systems have not yet proven to the same extent in comparable scenarios. There are also structural concerns beyond performance. Israel is unlikely to transfer missile production technology or allow local manufacturing of interceptors, effectively tying Finland's long-term sustainment to external supply chains. Moreover, Israel's geographic distance from Northern Europe and its own persistent demand for missile stocks raise questions about the reliability of wartime resupply. When it comes to the Patriot system, the situation is similar, but with plans to build an independent PAC-3 missile production facility in Germany, it still looks like a better choice. The engineering component of Finland's defense forces is, as expected, well developed. In a swampy and wooded theater with relatively few highways, defenses are often anchored not on bare ground, but at traffic junctions, bridges, crossings, and passages between bodies of water and forest areas. Engineers in practice determine where an enemy can move quickly and where it is forced to slow down, disperse, and become vulnerable to artillery. This is why the withdrawal from the Ottawa Convention is a real boost. It gives Finnish troops back a much-needed means of deterring enemy infantry with anti-personnel landmines. Engineers can also be directly involved in such important things as aerial reconnaissance and fire correction if there are no dedicated UAV units in place. As we said above, there can be a lot or a little artillery, but its effectiveness is determined by a cycle that sounds something like this: detect, transmit, guide, strike, change position. In 2022 through 2025, this cycle is obviously drone-driven from an intelligence perspective. Electronic warfare and communications come next, and this is where vulnerabilities are least visible from the outside. Drone warfare has turned the radio spectrum into a contested battlefield. Without protected communications, backup links, and training for operating under jamming, these units quickly become slower and more predictable. Finland has traditionally been strong in training and command systems, but since 2022, it is clear that a standard military radio network is no longer sufficient on its own. Distributed sensors, resilient communications, and routine training under heavy electronic interference are now essential. At the same time, firm conclusions are difficult, as publicly available information on Finland's electronic warfare and communications capabilities remains limited. Yet, we have to note that the wave of suspicious drone incidents that were seen in 2025 all across Europe and were linked to Russian reconnaissance operations pretty much bypassed the country despite its location. Moving on to the Air Force, we again encounter the Finnish reality of limited resources, few bases, several key wings, and a focus on ensuring that these units can perform a wide range of tasks. The Air Force is publicly structured around the Karelian Air Wing in Risala and the Lapland Air Wing in Rovaniemi as combat centers for fighter aviation, plus the Satakunta Air Wing in Pirkala as an important element of support operations in the southern part of the country. All in all, this is a fairly compact network, where a loss of momentum at one of the nodes will inevitably be felt throughout the entire system. The material basis of the Air Force relies on quite old, but still capable, FA-18CD Hornets. This quite interesting choice was entirely justified by several main reasons. The first was the limited strategic depth and number of air bases. Long before the Hornet adoption, the idea of dispersal and the use of the road network as spare airfields emerged. Preparations for the program called Dispersed Road Bases began in the 1960s and were, to a great extent, successful. The Hornet, like any carrier-based aircraft, was designed for hard landings and takeoffs on short runways. It has a stronger structure, a tailhook, and a larger landing gear for exactly those reasons. Considering the Finnish climate and harsh winters, it is clear that such design features are an advantage in a country that considers ordinary roads as alternate airfields during combat operations. The Hornet is also a twin-engined aircraft, which provides additional survivability and backup for flights in difficult weather and emergency situations. For example, in the event of the loss of one of the engines, the chances of saving the pilot's life and the aircraft itself are much greater than in the case of a single-engine variant, such as the F-16. This was demonstrated by the fact that the Air Force lost 2 of its fighters in 1999 and 2010 during exercises, but pilots in both cases ejected safely. So, the decision to procure not the Fighting Falcon, Mirage 2000, or Gripen was quite rational. Now for the main breakthrough that makes the Finnish Air Force much more interesting in 2024 through 2026. Finland selected the F-35A as its future fighter jet, ordering 64 aircraft with deliveries in 2026 through 2030. This transition reached a symbolic milestone on December 16, 2025, when the first Finnish F-35A was officially unveiled. But even more important is that the new air fleet remains constrained by ammunition, with just 240 AIM-120D3 AMRAAMs purchased along with the jets. In the air, deep strike capabilities are to be provided by 70 AGM-158 JASSM cruise missiles, the purchase of which dates back to 2011. Furthermore, in May 2024, Finland officially announced the additional purchase of air-to-ground missile capability for the FA-18s, very likely JASSMs. With the Finnish Air Force, as in other areas, we see a clear intention to modernize, limited by financial constraints. 2 fighter units, plus a support wing, are good for manageability and logistics, but it also means that an enemy trying to impose attrition can quite successfully paralyze critical nodes. Airfield infrastructure, stocks of necessary parts, technical personnel, and training centers. Finnish aviation also cannot afford losses, because with at most 62 combat fighters, each aircraft taken out of action decreases combat effectiveness significantly. The purchase of F-35s, while a future-proof investment, is also not a guarantee of air superiority in conflict, because everything depends on whether the Finns will manage to complete training and build up sufficient ammunition for these aircraft within the 5 years of the fighter adoption program. The Finnish Navy may appear small when judged purely by ship numbers, but its structure makes sense once geography and mission are taken into account. Finland does not seek a sustained ocean presence. Its navy is designed for control and denial of the coastal zone, protection of sea lines of communication in the Baltic, and extensive use of mine warfare in narrow and shallow waters. This focus is clearly visible in the classes of ships the defense forces operate, and in the way modernization has been prioritized. The Light Surface Combat Corps consists of 4 Hamina-class missile boats, whose midlife modernization was completed in 2023. This upgrade significantly expanded their combat value. The boats received new sensors, PTO 2020 anti-ship missiles, Mkanto Mark II surface-to-air missiles with a range of 20 kilometers, and lightweight torpedoes. With these changes, the Hamina class gained some ability to defend itself against incoming missiles, while also adding limited anti-submarine capability. The most important future element of the fleet is the Squadron 2020 program and the Pohjanmaa-class corvettes, of which 4 are on order. These ships are large by Finnish standards and are intended as true multi-role surface combatants for the Baltic. They are armed with a 57mm Bofors gun, PTO 2020 anti-ship missiles, and lightweight torpedoes, but their most significant feature is air defense. The Poyama class will carry ESSM Block II missiles launched from a Mark 41 vertical launch system, giving Finland, for the first time, a surface ship capable of modern missile-on-missile air defense against advanced aerial threats. The Mark 41 VSL system is also a good solution because it can actually utilize a much more advanced missile, such as the SM-3 or the SM-6, so the design is 100% future-proof. A notable thread linking older and newer platforms is the transition from Saab-based MTO-85 anti-ship missiles to the newer PTO-2020 system. In August 2025, the Defense Forces reported that the new surface-to-surface missile was already in operational use. It is being integrated across naval missile boats, future corvettes, and coastal missile units, creating a common strike system for both sea-based and land-based coastal defense. This improves logistics, training, and operational flexibility in a combat environment. Mine warfare remains a central pillar of Finnish naval doctrine. The two Hamidma-class mine layers can deploy large numbers of naval mines and also carry Umkanto surface-to-air missiles for limited self-defense, though they are not designed for high-intensity air combat. Mine laying is complemented by modern mine countermeasure forces. The Katampa-class vessels, based in the Pansio area near Turku, are purpose-built mine countermeasure ships, and form the core of the Mine Warfare Squadron, providing the ability to detect, classify, and neutralize advanced naval mines. Older Ranma-class missile boats remain in service, armed with RBS-15 MTO-85M missiles and naval guns. However, as the rest of the ships discussed further, they lack modern missile air defense, which drastically reduces their chances of surviving real combat. An essential part of the naval system is the coastal Jaeger forces. Operating from small landing craft and coastal positions, they provide surveillance, targeting, and direct fire support with coastal weapons. They are designed to work closely with naval units, missile batteries, and minefields, reinforcing Finland's emphasis on joint coastal defense and denial rather than sea control in the traditional blue water sense. Overall, the Finnish Navy is structured to make its nearby waters difficult and costly for an adversary to operate in. It is also important that the Navy actively transitions to missile-capable ships with layered air defense, extensive mine warfare, modern coastal missiles, and highly mobile coastal troops form a coherent system tailored specifically to the Baltic Sea and Finland's defensive needs. The process is also being used as a deliberate attempt to strengthen the domestic military-industrial complex and, more specifically, the air component. So, Finland is not only buying new aircraft like many European nations, but localizes key sustainment skills and infrastructure so the fleet can be kept operational even if foreign supply chains are stressed. A new in-country F-135 engine assembly and maintenance capability was completed in 2025 and handed to Patria, which is tasked with assembling, maintaining, and servicing the engines. In parallel, Patria has been integrated into the global F-35 industrial network through forward fuselage production in Finland, ensuring that the fighter program is not treated as airframes only. This fits into a broader national sustainment model. Patria's strategic partnership with the Defense Forces covers many other equipment types, including naval defense systems, helicopter maintenance, and land systems. It supports APC production through programs such as the Patria 6x6 and prospective Patria ARV artillery systems. Moreover, when it comes to APCs, Patria is one of Europe's leading producers, supplying hundreds of vehicles directly to countries such as Latvia, Sweden, Denmark, and Germany through the CAVS 6x6 program. While its designs are also produced under license abroad, most notably in Poland, where the Patria AMV forms the basis of the Rosomak fleet numbering hundreds of vehicles. Ammunition production also expands via Namo Lapua and Namo Vitavuori factories, backed by EU ASAP funding for 155mm shell capacity and propellant production, plus major national orders such as the €180 million for 762mm cartridges with main deliveries between 2025 and 2028, and €79 million for 155mm propelling charges. On the naval side, the Poyama-class corvettes are being built by the domestic Ranma Marine Constructions conglomerate, with Saab as the key combat system partner. To sum things up, with all these significant advantages the Finnish Defense Forces have over the average NATO member army, their capabilities are still fairly limited compared to their most likely adversary, Russia, mostly because Finland is not trying to invest its limited resources in everything at once, nor can it. Instead, it maintains a lightweight professional corps as its peacetime army and focuses on quality where it counts. However, in crisis, it also has a very specific mobilization framework, unlike many European countries, and clearly structured and truly trained reserves in each part of the country. Combined with harsh weather, forests, lakes, limited road corridors, and an operating environment that naturally punishes large mechanized thrusts, the approach is utterly rational. And this is the key point. Unlike almost every other European military, Finland is likely to mount a tenacious resistance. First and foremost against Russia in an infantry-centric, protracted conflict, which is the only realistic style of fighting in large-scale war when drone warfare dominates and attrition becomes decisive. The Air Force is likely to find itself under significant pressure even during and after the transition to the F-35, especially in terms of sustaining offensive tempo. This is the reality for a country whose most populated regions can be reached not only by ballistic and cruise missiles, but also by cheaper deep strike drones. However, Finland has long anticipated this vulnerability. Its pre-designed and repeatedly tested concept of aviation dispersal, using roads as runways. Fighters that survive ground attacks will certainly be capable of denying enemy air dominance in contested sectors, but whether Finland will have the quantities, munitions depth, and maintenance capacity to achieve sustained air superiority is much harder to estimate. At the same time, the Navy, specializing in coastal defense, mine warfare, and anti-ship strikes in confined waters, will also become an attractive target for missiles and drones. The lack of medium and long-range air defenses on much of the current fleet is a key reason for that, yet it remains a rational tool for Finland's geography, patrolling and controlling choke points, laying mines, and making the Baltic coastal zone costly and risky for any adversary to operate in. In other categories, air defense coverage, electronic warfare, radars, drones, and counter-drone measures, we still see relatively small equipment numbers, and this may be a key weakness for a country preparing for a defensive war of attrition on its own land. So, investments in the production of equipment in these categories would likely yield the best results when it comes to deterrence and performance in a possible conflict. This would actually be in line with Finland already relying heavily on domestic production of many systems, from ships and APCs to advanced technologies such as fifth-generation fighter jets. So, despite real drawbacks and modest financing, the Finnish armed forces are in a significantly better position than many other NATO countries in terms of defense capability. The decades of not relying on any alliance while living next to Russian forces push Finland to build armed forces designed to withstand the first severe blow and keep standing as long as mobilization, logistics, and supplies can keep pace with operational needs. Finland was among the first in the West to feel the breath of new uncertain times, and it has been preparing, slowly, silently, but steadily, for a scenario that some European countries still refuse to treat as realistic. A prolonged, drone-saturated, high-intensity war where the decisive advantage is not a perfect plan, but the ability to endure and regenerate combat power.